Hello, my name is Joycelyn, and I thought I would create a video to show you how I did the background quilting designs for the Kimberbell Main Street Celebration bench pillow. This is for the borders. These are my border pieces. Now you can see right here that they are already done. I'm going to show you how to put it all together. Once you have your pieces sewn together, you have each one of these are 38.5 inches long. So I figured out that the border designs, there are different sizes. They come in many different sizes, but you do need the 3.5 inches wide. And the 3.5 inch wide borders come in 7 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, and 14 inches. Now, since I have a large enough hoop, you can see here, I actually have a Husqvarna Viking Epic machine that I can use this large hoop on, and this hoop is 360 by 200, which is approximately 9.5 by 16, I think. You may or may not have a hoop that will be that large to fit your machine, but I'm just showing you how you could do this, and you could probably modify this to use the largest hoop size that you have for your machine. What I figured out on the background border designs is that for this middle section right here, I used the 3 by 14 inch file for the background quilting design. For each of these end pieces, I used the 3 by 12 inch design, which comes out here to be about, a half an inch to it, probably about an inch left on each side. Right here on the end here, my design ends about right there on both ends. So then my seam there will be a 1/4 inch seam, so I don't have to cut off any of the design. So it fits in there really nicely. So I did two different sizes of the borders. The 3 by 14 is here in the middle, and the 3 by 12 are on the ends. Now, what I also want to show you, I did both of these designs in one hoop. You can see here how they fit in the hoop. Here's a little trick that I have learned, is that my stabilizer right here, you can see I have a whole bunch of it rolled up on the edge here. I went ahead and measured out 3 times the size of my hoop as far as my stabilizer goes, and I cut that off 3 times the length, and then I rolled it up on the edge. I also, on here, you can tell there's more stabilizer on this side of the hoop than there is on this side of the hoop. Just have a little bit showing there. And I will show you when I get to the machine how I did the middle design first. So what you do before you do this, you make sure that you fold this in half and mark a center point right here, either with a pin or a fabric marker. I would just mark the fabric. If you're going to use a fabric marker, just mark it on the center in the back. Make sure that you mark the center, because we're going to be using that once we get the batting down in the hoop. We're going to mark a center line on the batting that you have stitched out on your machine, and I will show you how to do that in the next step. You can see the screen of my machine here. I have one of the designs loaded on my machine for the patriotic border. Now I have the 3 by 14 design, which is the one we're actually going to put in the middle of the border. And so we're going to start with the middle design first to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. So what I'm going to do also is then I'm going to duplicate this, and then I'm going to move it over to the right side so that I can do both pieces of border both borders at the same time. And this also saves on stabilizer. You can see that. I'm going to go ahead and continue on. will attach my hoop in a second, but first I want to show you on my screen. Now I know some machines don't do this, but on my machine, then it sees that I have both designs here. They're two separate designs. So on my stitch count here for this design, I have 1:1, 1:2, 1:3, 4, and 5. So all of those steps are for the border for this one design. And then it continues on with the second design, which is 2, 1, 2, 2, and so forth to 2, 5. Now, I think on other machines, it may combine all these numbers and start with 1 and go through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You just have to be aware of it, so it might be a different number on your machine. So here what I have done is I've stitched out both placement lines for both of these designs. Now on my machine, when I had to do that, I had to go design number 1, and then I had to go to the machine step for design number 2, the first machine step for design number 2. So I have placed out both of my placement lines here, you could see, for those designs. Now the first placement line tells you to put a piece of batting on, which is what I'm going to be doing here. I'm going to put a piece of batting on over that placement line, and I'm going to put another piece of batting. Now I didn't really cut the length of the batting, you can see that here. I just cut a width, or actually I used extra pieces of batting, so I'm just going to make that cover my placement line here. And then what I'm going to do, you can tape this if you feel more comfortable with taping it. I don't always tape it down, but I know that everything is covered right here. So what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to very carefully watch it, and I'm going to go ahead and start the placement line for the second stitch to tack down the batting. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll be right back. So you can see here that I have already done my tack down of my batting pieces on both pieces. Now you don't have to do both pieces at the same time. You can do one and then one completely, as far as putting the batting down, putting the fabric down, and then doing the border, stitching out the border, and then you could do the other side. I'm just going to do mine both at this kind of the same time, just for this video, so you can kind of see how I do it. So the next stitching I'm doing stitch number 3, which would be marking a placement line for my actual fabric piece that I'm going to put down. And you can see also here that I have trimmed around the batting. You always want to trim around the batting, because you don't want that batting to get in your seam line. It just creates a lot of bulk. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can see my trimming is not perfect. But also, when you're trimming that, you want to make sure that you take your hoop out of the machine and place it on a flat surface so that you can trim that without putting a lot of pressure in your stabilizer, because you don't want to do that, because then things won't line up very well. So I've already stitched out the placement line for my fabric, and you can see here also that I have marked the center piece of each of these. I've marked 7 inches here, 7 inches here, marked a center line here. That is where I'm going to put my center piece that I marked before of my border fabric. Okay, so you want to put that border fabric down as close as you possibly can to that line, and make sure that your fabric piece is just lined up with those. I know you can't see them, but it's very hard to show them on camera. but you want to make sure that everything is lined up properly on your machine. Make sure that your border is, there's a line here, there's a stitch line here, and your border has to be lined up on those lines on either side. Make sure your seams are in there well, and what I do at this point, double check, make sure that is in the center, and then I will take a piece of tape and I tape this up at the top. I'll tape it there at the top to my hoop, making sure that it's lined up correctly. I'm going to tape up this one also. You may not be able to see that, it might be off camera. And then I'm going to line up the other piece of border that I have here. Whoops, caught on my needle. And I'm going to put that, center that in there. So I'm using the center mark of the border piece itself, and I'm lining that up there. I'm going to tape it here on the bottom, and I'm going to tape it at the top, making sure that I have all my seams going the right way, that I've ironed them so there's no bulk. Tape that at the top there, and I will tape this one here. And once I make sure that everything is lined up, then I'm going to take my pins out. Of course, don't forget to take your pins out. You can also mark that with a fabric marker if you want to. I just thought it was easier for me to use the pins. So, and then I'm going to go ahead and stitch out my tack down line. Now you will notice when you're stitching out your tack down line that it will not stitch a stitch going across the top. You'll get a stitch going down this side and this side of each border. So make sure that your fabric doesn't move. Try to, I think mine moved a little bit. So I'm going to try and move it back over. So you will just, and of course you don't need to have a tack down line up there or down at the bottom here. So I'm going to go ahead and tack that down, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have my tack down lines stitched out. You can see that it just, there's nothing at the top, but they are very close. These tack down lines are very close. I'm hoping you can see that. You can see it probably right here better because I used white thread. And you can see how close that is to the edge. Don't worry about that. It's not really a problem. You have the batting in here, and once everything gets stitched down, you'll be fine, and you have that quarter, you have enough room there to do a 1/4 inch seam, and you won't have to take that stitching out at all. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch out the border design. Once you have finished and completed stitching out the border designs on your border pieces there, you remove the hoop from your machine, and you remove the project from the hoop because you're going to now trim around the batting and the stabilizer only on the outside edges of your border pieces. And I will show you just 1 second in this video here. There we go. We fold those end pieces back, cut just on the stabilizer, just on the edge of the batting. And do that all the way around the edge pieces of the batting. Make sure you don't cut your border pieces at all. Make sure you don't cut those, and then we'll go on to the next step. You can see here that I've already done the placement stitch and the tack down stitch for the batting pieces, the 2 batting pieces, and I have trimmed outside on the edges of my batting. You can see it doesn't really have to be perfect, it's just close enough. And then now I'm going to move on to go ahead and stitch down the placement stitch for the fabric piece. So now what I have done is I have the placement lines for the border pieces. So then I have this border piece, and I've tried to keep them going in the same direction because then the designs are a little bit, so that the designs will line up and that will look like one design going all the way. So I have folded this piece over to the edge of the batting. So you want to make sure that the batting piece is lined up, and it's lined up on both ends, and there's a stitch line, there's a placement line there, there's a placement line there. And then you pull this piece down, make sure that it's lined up on both sides. And you can feel it if you don't want it to bulk up here. So I can feel I pushed it a little bit too far there. So I want it to be lined up there, and then I'm going to take my tape again, and I'm going to put a piece of tape up here at the top on one side, and I'm going to put a piece of tape on the other side, making sure that it's pretty darn close to, I think it's off just a hair. They don't give you much wiggle room on this, so you want to make sure it's as exact, as close as possible. And then I'm going to put a piece of tape on this end, and on this piece, put a piece of tape on the outside of the stitch lines. And then I'm going to repeat that process with this piece. Now you have the rest of this piece hanging over the edge of the hoop. Make sure it doesn't get stuck underneath your hoop. That would not be a good thing, and it would not be fun to have to tear that out. So I'm going to fold this back so that I can see that piece of batting on the first center piece there. I'm going to line that up as best I can and fold this piece over, making sure, using my fingers to just kind of line that piece of batting up underneath there, making sure the sides are okay, and make sure that it doesn't bulk up and the batting, one piece of batting doesn't cover another piece of batting. So I'm going to take another piece of tape. I think that looks pretty good, and I'm going to put a piece of tape there and another piece of tape up here at the top, and 2 more pieces of tape down here at the bottom edge. And then I'm going to stitch down the tack down line. I'm just going to go ahead and start stitching out the background quilting design. So you can see here that I have already stitched out my placement line, stitched down the batting, and trimmed around the batting, and stitched out my placement line for the rest of the border. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do basically the opposite of what we did on the last for the last section is that we have this section here, which is at the top or the other end of this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this. Hopefully I can show it better on so you can see it on the camera. I took the hoop out of the machine so that I could line it up better so that you could possibly see that. Let me move it over just a little bit. There we go. So what I'm going to do is just line that piece of batting up with the piece of batting, just like you did in the last step, but just in the opposite direction. And actually, had I really thought about it, I could have moved this whole design up into the top portion of the hoop there. So I would have a little more room down here. But I also want to make sure that you can see this. I hope you can. I'm going to get it lined up here. Make sure that that's laying flat, that everything's laying flat there. And then I'm going to get my piece of tape and I'm going to tape it there, making sure that I have the batting pieces lined up, the outside edges lined up to my placement lines there. So I'm going to put that there. I'm going to line everything else up along my placement lines here. That looks good. I'm going to put a piece of tape up here at the top on that edge, piece of tape at the top on the other edge, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the other piece. I think what I'm going to do is take this, I don't know if you can see that, and I'm going to pin it up here so that it doesn't get in the way and so that I don't get in the way of it when it is stitching out. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Kind of line that up a little bit there. Fold this over. It's a little bit tricky, but and it probably, like I said, it would have been a little bit easier if I moved the design up into the hoop a little bit or moved it up to the other end of the hoop. So I'm making sure now that I'm pretty sure that that's lined up pretty good. I'm going to put another piece of tape over there, put a piece of tape here. I don't always use tape on things, but I think it's real important to use tape on this piece and on this project at this point to make sure that everything stays in place. So I'm going to try and make sure that that's lined up. Of course, if you really wanted to do this, I could have done this over at my cutting table and made sure everything was lined up a lot better. I just wanted to show you how it looked in the machine. Put a piece of tape over that edge and another piece of tape over that edge. I think I'm good to go. Now I'm going to stitch out the placement stitches and stitch out the design. And there we have, my designs are all done. I've done all 3 pieces of both of the borders. And it takes me a lot less hooping to do it that way. If you have, if you don't have a hoop that's this big, then figure out what size hoops you have, and then figure out which designs that you have that'll fit with so many hoopings of your design. And then you should be able to get it to where, see how my design goes almost to the end of here, and it gives me enough room there for a border. I'm hoping you can see that. Oh, maybe not. Let me check my camera. There. Let me just take it out of the hoop. There we go. You can kind of see it. There's the how the design goes almost to the edge of, where's my, here we go. So the design goes right there to the edge. I have enough there for a seam. I have enough there for a seam. Now, I didn't, obviously, it's not perfect because this has a little, this one over here has a little more fabric on it than this one does at the edge of the design, but it doesn't really matter as far as I'm concerned. It's close enough, and you're not going to notice once you have the whole pillow put together anyway. So then what I'm going to do is to take this out of the hoop, go to my my cutting board, and then I'm going to trim off the stabilizer to the end of the fabric. I'm not going to cut the stabilizer here. I'm just going to cut it at the edge of the fabric. So, and then there we have it. We have two pieces of border, and I only had to do 3 different hoopings. Okay, so I have finished my 2 border pieces, stitching out the quilting border designs. You can see there, it's really hard to get it all on camera at one time, so I'm just going to go from one end. You see I have the 2 ends there and go all the way across. You can't even really tell when one design stopped and the other one started. I think it looks really nice. I'm glad I only had to do 3 hoopings instead of 6. It takes a lot less time, a lot less stabilizer, and there you go. Thanks for watching. I hope yours turns out really nice also.